Rachel Montgomery was the kind of woman who turned heads without trying. Her long, thick golden hair flowed like liquid gold whenever she moved, and her ocean blue eyes shimmered with intelligence, curiosity, and hidden heartache. At 23, she had climbed the marketing ladder with nothing but her own grit and creative brilliance. Yet every morning as she stood before her closet, picking a modest outfit for work, she also picked up something invisible, a mask. A mask that smiled on cue, nodded politely, and pretended she wasn't slowly being chipped away by an office culture that saw her as nothing more than the pretty girl who got lucky. In meetings, her ideas were spoken over, her slides glanced at and quickly dismissed, and her voice, once confident, had started shrinking into silence. She never corrected her colleagues when they mispronounced her name or took credit for her strategies. They didn't know who she was married to, and she intended to keep it that way, not because she was ashamed, but because she wanted to make it on her own merit, to rise without riding the coattails of Alex Carter, New York's most envied billionaire, whose name alone could open every closed door. At home, she was adored. Alex would cup her face every night and call her his golden girl, telling her she was the smartest person in any room, even if the world couldn't see it yet. But his love, though sincere and overwhelming, couldn't reach the corners of her soul that were bruised by daily dismissals and professional invisibility. She didn't want pity or rescue. She wanted respect. And so she said nothing. Not about the sly comments that undermined her, or the team lunches where she was purposely excluded. She told herself it would pass, that her work would speak loud enough eventually, but the silence kept growing louder. The office was a glass prison, transparent, modern, and suffocating. Her smile became thinner with each passing week, her laughter more hollow. She began to look down when she walked the halls, afraid her eyes might betray the fatigue in her spirit. And yet, she kept showing up, early every morning, coffee in hand, deadlines on track, heart heavy, but head held high. No one noticed the effort behind that composure. The war she fought just to stay visible in a place that kept trying to erase her. She would sit in brainstorming sessions, offering insights that went ignored until a male colleague repeated them minutes later. Only then would the room nod in agreement. She would draft proposals late into the night, only for someone else's name to appear at the top. But she smiled, always smiled, because if she let even one crack show, the whole illusion might shatter. Her mask wasn't vanity, it was survival. Even when she cried in the restroom during lunch breaks, she made sure her eyeliner didn't smudge. Even when she received backhanded compliments like, "You're actually smart for someone so pretty," she nodded and thanked them, because professionalism meant swallowing insults with grace. She avoided office gossip, not out of pride, but because she knew her success would always be questioned, as if her face, not her mind, got her where she was. And at night, when Alex would run his fingers through her hair and ask, "You okay, baby?" she'd always say, "Just tired," because how could she tell him that the world she was trying to conquer made her feel invisible? He'd pull her close, whispering that she was born to shine, but his warmth couldn't melt the ice forming around her heart. She didn't want to be seen as Alex Carter's wife. She wanted to be known as Rachel Montgomery, the strategist who could flip numbers into narratives, who could turn dead campaigns into gold. But in the silence of corporate hallways, where promotions were handed out at wine dinners she was never invited to, that dream felt distant. Still, she endured. She built walls no one could see, wore armor that looked like confidence, and danced through meetings like everything was fine. But deep down, she was tired. Tired of being underestimated, of being treated like decoration in rooms where she should have been a force. Every day was a performance, and though she had memorized every line, the role was draining her. She didn't want to be saved, only seen. But how long can a woman carry the weight of invisibility before she starts fading even from herself? And just when Rachel thought she had learned to endure the quiet cruelty of being overlooked, it happened. An eruption that shattered the fragile armor she had been holding together for months. The day had started like any other. The buzz of fluorescent lights overhead, the faint clicking of keyboards, the false smiles exchanged across cubicles. But as she walked into the conference room, clutching her presentation notes with trembling fingers, A storm was already brewing, invisible to everyone except her instinct. She had spent nights perfecting her strategy, analyzing data, finding the kind of insights that only someone deeply invested could uncover. Yet as she stood before the screen, heart pounding and words carefully chosen, her boss's expression hardened like stone. When she finished, before she could even exhale, Mr. Kirkland scoffed and leaned back with the smugness of someone who believed humiliation was a form of leadership. Then came the words, the poison that would haunt her. Maybe you should stick to designing posters and leave strategy to the big boys. The laughter wasn't loud, but it echoed like gunfire in her ears. Her hands clenched at her sides as her heart collapsed inside her chest. The room that once felt like a battlefield now felt like a firing squad. Co-workers exchanged glances, some looking down awkwardly, others amused by the show. No one defended her. No one challenged him. In that moment, Rachel wasn't a team member or even a human being. She was a target. Her cheeks burned, not from shame, but from a rage so deep she didn't know where to place it. She wanted to speak, to fight back, to throw her chair across the room and walk out with dignity, but her voice had betrayed her, stuck somewhere between pain and paralysis. She nodded, said noted, and returned to her seat as if her entire soul hadn't just been gutted in front of everyone. For the rest of the meeting, she kept her eyes on the table, pretending to take notes while hiding the tremble in her hands. The moment the meeting ended, she escaped to the restroom, locked herself in the last stall, and broke down silently, wiping tears with the cuff of her sleeve, terrified someone might hear. Later that day, she sat in her office while messages pinged with fake compliments, co-workers pretending they were on her side, while still laughing behind screens. Her inbox became a battlefield of backhanded reassurances. Even the intern who used to greet her with respect now avoided eye contact. She walked through the office like a ghost, her name now synonymous with pity. She wasn't just embarrassed. She was erased. The narrative had been set. She was too sensitive, not tough enough, better suited for the visuals. That night, she went home, made Alex his favorite dinner, even joked about a fake deadline just to hide the redness in her eyes. She laughed at his stories, listened to his plans, curled into his arms as if she hadn't been emotionally mugged just hours earlier. Because how could she tell the man who loved her that someone had torn her apart in front of a room full of people, and she hadn't even defended herself? She laid in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, replaying every moment, wondering what she could have done differently, how she had failed to command the respect she deserved. She questioned her talent, her worth, her voice. The confidence she had worked so hard to build now felt like a crumbling facade, a beautiful house collapsing from within. Even her reflection felt unfamiliar. A girl with sad eyes who once dreamed of becoming a leader, now reduced to a shell holding back tears at the sound of her own name. She started to dread the mornings, not because of the work, but because of the eyes, the ones that saw her as weak, as broken, as irrelevant. And perhaps the most devastating part was the silence. No one called. No one checked on her. Her phone remained quiet, as though the humiliation had erased her existence. She was alone, not in the literal sense, but in that soul-deep kind of way where no one sees the real you anymore. She tried to rationalize it, telling herself everyone has bad days, but deep inside, she knew something had shifted. A boundary had been crossed, and she had let it happen. Not because she lacked strength, but because in that moment, her strength had been shattered. She lay awake for hours, her mind looping the scene over and over again, each time finding a new way to blame herself. She didn't cry because of what was said. She cried because she believed it might be true. Rachel didn't recognize herself anymore, and neither did Alex. Gone was the vibrant woman who once filled rooms with her passion, her energy, her effortless glow. In her place sat a hollowed version, quiet, detached, and distant, as though her spirit had slowly unraveled thread by thread. Alex first noticed the change when her laughter, once rich and effortless, began sounding rehearsed, as if her joy had been reduced to muscle memory. She would sit at her laptop for hours, eyes fixed on the screen, but unfocused, her hands still on the keyboard, as if her fingers had forgotten what to type. Meals became silent, conversations shallow, and each "I'm fine" she gave felt like a wall being built higher. One evening, as rain pattered softly against the window, Alex walked into the living room to find her curled up on the couch, legs pulled to her chest, gaze distant and glassy, like she was trapped in a world he couldn't reach. He sat beside her, hesitant but aching, and placed a gentle hand on her back. "Talk to me," he whispered, voice tender, steady, but laced with fear. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she exhaled, a sound that wasn't a breath but a surrender. And in that instant, everything poured out. Her shoulders shook as she spoke, every word trembling like it hurt to release. She confessed the humiliation, the coldness in the office, the way each comment chipped away at her like waves breaking stone. She told him about the stares, the smirks, the loneliness. She spoke of how she stayed silent, how she questioned her own worth, how she felt invisible even when she was trying her hardest to shine. The more she spoke, the more Alex's heart cracked open. Every word like a dagger, every tear like a scream his soul couldn't unhear. He held her tightly, fiercely, as if he could squeeze the pain out of her body and into his own. And as she buried her face into his chest, soaked in tears and shame, he didn't offer platitudes. He didn't promise quick fixes. He just listened, because he knew this wasn't about ego. It was about a wound so deep it had infected the very way she saw herself. That night, after she finally fell asleep in his arms, clutching his shirt like a child terrified of waking into the same nightmare, Alex rose and stood by the tall glass windows of their penthouse. The city below twinkled like a dream, but all he could see was the pain in Rachel's eyes. He thought of the woman he married, the bold, brilliant, sharp-minded woman who used to debate brand strategies with him at midnight, who once walked into a client meeting and wowed a boardroom full of skeptics. That woman hadn't disappeared. She had been buried alive beneath layers of cruelty, indifference, and systemic dismissal. And now all he could feel was the weight of her silence, the burden she had carried alone for far too long. His fist clenched in quiet fury, not at her, but at the world that dared to diminish her. He wasn't just angry. He was devastated that she felt she had to endure it alone, that he had missed the signs until the spark in her had nearly gone out. Alex Carter was known for building empires, turning companies around with a single phone call, dominating markets with calculated precision. But this was different. This was personal. This wasn't about power or money. This was about the woman he loved more than his legacy, the woman who had once made him believe that love could be louder than ambition. He didn't pace or plan that night. He simply stood there, staring at the city lights, letting his resolve harden like steel beneath his skin. He would not let her disappear. He would not let her brilliance be buried under the weight of small minds. Something inside him shifted, not in a dramatic, vengeful way, but in a calm, calculated burn, the kind that said action was inevitable. She had protected his heart for years, and now it was time for him to protect hers, not with grand gestures or empty statements, but with the precision of a man who knew how to move silently and strike loudly. Tomorrow, the world that humiliated Rachel would meet the storm it never saw coming. Because when love becomes pain and silence becomes unbearable, even a billionaire's hands are no longer for deals. They're for war cloaked in tenderness. 2 days after holding his broken wife in his arms, Alex Carter stepped out of his Maybach, straightened his obsidian Armani suit, and walked through the glass doors of Montgomery and Ray Marketing with a calmness that masked a storm beneath. His presence alone disrupted the rhythm of the building. Assistants fumbled papers, interns froze mid-step, and executives glanced nervously over their laptops. His shoes echoed across the marble floor like a countdown, each footfall slicing through the shallow peace of the office. The receptionist blinked twice as if unsure she was truly seeing one of the most powerful men in New York standing before her, his sapphire blue eyes unreadable. "I need to see Mr. Kirkland," he said, voice smooth but firm, not asking, informing. Within moments, the glass doors of the executive floor swung open, and there stood Kirkland, visibly trying to compose himself, his confident facade cracking like brittle glass. Alex entered the office without waiting for an invitation, his movements deliberate, unhurried, deadly in their restraint. He didn't waste time with greetings or formalities. He stood in the middle of the room, fixing his gaze directly on the man who had mocked and minimized the woman he adored. "I'm not here as Alex Carter, the investor, or CEO," he began, his voice low but cold enough to freeze marrow. "I'm here as Rachel Montgomery's husband, a woman this company has mistreated, underestimated, and broken, while you all applauded." Kirkland shifted uncomfortably, but Alex didn't flinch. "She didn't tell you who I was," he continued, "because she wanted to earn her place. And she did. Her campaigns outperformed every quarter. She increased brand retention by 36% in less than a year. She created the viral strategy that won your biggest client. And yet you ridiculed her like she was an intern fumbling coffee orders." His voice never rose, but every syllable felt like a hammer striking glass. "You told her to leave strategy to the big boys," Alex said, narrowing his eyes. "Let me tell you something. My empire runs on strategy. And if I had a team of Rachels, I'd never lose a deal." Kirkland swallowed hard, visibly paling as Alex stepped closer. "You took her silence for weakness. But silence is what powerful people use when they're deciding how loud their next move should be." Alex didn't pace, didn't point. He stood tall, centered, unmoving, like a storm gathered into human form. "You humiliated a woman who came in every day, gave her best, and never used my name to get a seat at your table. You didn't just fail her, you failed this company. You proved you don't know how to lead. Because true leaders lift, they don't tear down." The air thickened, as though the very walls were holding their breath. "I don't need to threaten you, Mr. Kirkland," Alex said, turning toward the door. "Your actions already did the damage. But understand this, there won't be a next time." He paused at the threshold, voice turning razor sharp. "And if you ever treat another woman the way you treated my wife, I won't come back as her husband. I'll come back as your reckoning." Then, without waiting for a reply, Alex walked out, leaving silence in his wake, the kind that lingers long after the storm has passed. Receptionists stared, executives peeked around corners, and whispers spread like wildfire. He came for her. She's married to him. He defended her like she was royalty. But Alex didn't care about the gossip or the stares. His only focus was Rachel, the woman who had quietly endured so much. In his heart, he knew this wasn't about flexing power. This was about justice, dignity, love that doesn't just hold your hand during pain, but shows up to erase the hand that caused it. And as he exited the building, the sun broke through the overcast sky, bathing the steps in gold. It wasn't redemption yet, but it was the beginning. And for Alex Carter, it was only the first step in restoring a crown that never should have been stolen. The next morning, Rachel stepped through the familiar glass doors of her office building with a heart both cautious and curious, unsure of what the day might hold, but aware that something in the atmosphere had shifted. The receptionist, who once barely acknowledged her presence, now offered a stiff but respectful nod, as though recognizing a new aura around her that demanded attention. Whispers floated like smoke as she walked past cubicles, heads turning, eyes widening, conversations halting mid-sentence. It wasn't the stunned silence that unnerved her. It was the strange cocktail of guilt and awe in their stares. Before she could fully process it, a polite yet urgent message appeared on her screen. "Mr. Kirkland would like to see you in his office immediately." Her hands trembled slightly as she stood, not from fear this time, but from bracing for a moment she never thought would come. The walk to his office felt longer than usual, her heels clicking against the tile with a rhythm that echoed her racing heart. When she entered, he stood, not with arrogance, but with hesitation, shoulders slightly bowed as if trying to shrink his presence. His voice, once sharp and cutting, now carried the weight of discomfort as he began. "Rachel, I owe you an apology," he said, pausing before continuing with a breath that seemed forced through clenched humility. "I was wrong about your ideas, your place here, your worth." He glanced at the door, then gestured for her to step outside with him. Confused, she followed, and to her utter disbelief, he called for the attention of the entire team. There, in front of every colleague who had once watched her humiliation like a live show, he acknowledged his failure and announced her promotion to Senior Strategy Director. citing her visionary leadership, unmatched campaign performance, and unwavering professionalism. A murmur swept through the crowd, followed by hesitant claps that quickly turned into thunderous applause, though Rachel could still hear the echo of silence that had followed her pain not long ago. As she returned to her desk, the plaque bearing her new title already mounted on her door, a surreal stillness settled inside her. She didn't smile out of pride. She didn't cry out of relief. Instead, she let the moment wash over her like cold water after a long fever. Co-workers who had previously walked past her without so much as a glance now stopped by with exaggerated compliments, hollow jokes, and invitations to after-work drinks. She responded with civility, not warmth, offering the kind of smile that closed doors instead of opening them. Because now she saw them, not through the lens of longing or need for acceptance, but with clarity. The girl who once sought validation had vanished. In her place stood a woman who no longer needed to prove her value to people who once chose not to see it. Something deep within her had settled, not just the weight of a title, but the memory of her strength. She looked around the office and realized she didn't need their applause, their belated kindness, or even their remorse. What she had gained was far more valuable, herself. She remembered the passion that had brought her here, the ideas that made her stay up late with excitement, the fire that once fueled her dreams before fear doused it. And for the first time in weeks, Rachel exhaled, not from exhaustion, but from restoration. She didn't rise because someone handed her power. She rose because someone tried to take it, and failed. That evening, as the golden haze of sunset melted into the velvet of twilight, Rachel stood barefoot on the penthouse balcony, the wind teasing strands of her hair as she waited, heart full and trembling in quiet reflection. The city below pulsed with life, but for her it was silent. The only sound that mattered was the click of the door behind her and the familiar footsteps that followed. When Alex stepped out, loosened tie, sleeves rolled up, eyes filled with a kind of peace only love could offer, she didn't say a word. She simply turned and threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest, and whispered, "You saved me, but not just from them, from myself." Her voice cracked at the edges, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming truth she hadn't been able to face until now, that somewhere along the way, she had begun to believe the lies they told about her. Alex held her tighter, one hand gently cradling the back of her head, as if shielding her from every shadow that ever touched her. He kissed her forehead like it was sacred ground and murmured, "You were always enough." I just reminded them of what they forgot to see. His words weren't dramatic, but they settled into her soul like balm on an old wound, and something in her softened. Something that had been holding on so tightly for so long finally let go. The city lights flickered behind them, casting reflections like constellations on the windows. But Rachel didn't see the skyline. She only saw his eyes, the ocean blue gaze that had seen her at her worst and still looked at her like she was the most extraordinary woman alive. They didn't need to speak much. There was a language between them now that didn't require words, just the way he tucked her hair behind her ear, the way her fingers slipped into his like they were made to fit, the way they exhaled together as if releasing a breath they'd both been holding since the pain began. That night, they didn't turn on the television or scroll through their phones. They wrapped themselves in the kind of silence that healed, laying close on the couch as though distance between their bodies might let pain sneak back in. Rachel rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and with each thump, she felt pieces of herself returning, pieces she thought had been lost to shame and self-doubt. His touch wasn't possessive, it was grounding, a reminder that she didn't need to carry the world alone. When she looked up at him, eyes glossy with gratitude, Alex just smiled and whispered, "We rise together." And in that moment, she knew this love wasn't the kind built on flowers or fairy tales. It was forged in fire, tempered by trials and stronger for it. They weren't perfect, but they were powerful because they chose each other, not just in celebration, but in the moments when the world tried to break them. That night, their bodies curled together beneath the stars, the city glowing around them. But their world was just the two of them, hearts beating in rhythm, souls exhaling in sync, like a song written for only two. No titles, no pain, no masks, Just love, raw and real, standing behind her like an unshakable mountain and wrapping around her like the safest place on earth. In the weeks that followed, Rachel stepped into her new role, not just with authority, but with awakened clarity. A woman no longer shaped by circumstance, but sculpted by resilience. The once quiet walks to her office were now filled with purpose. Her voice in meetings carried not just strategy, but conviction that couldn't be ignored. Her presence became undeniable, not because of her husband's name, but because of the way she had risen. Scarred, yes, but unshakable. And Alex, ever by her side yet never in her shadow, expanded his empire with the same precision as always, but now with a new heartbeat driving it. Boardrooms that once discussed mergers and profits now echoed with plans to establish change. Mentorship programs for women, leadership pipelines for minorities, and safeguards against the very kind of cruelty Rachel had endured. He didn't boast or take credit. He simply acted, quietly investing in justice where silence had once lived. And together they became more than a couple. They became momentum. They were a vision of what love looks like when it doesn't just protect but uplifts, when it doesn't just hold hands in the dark, but shines light into broken places. One crisp autumn afternoon, Rachel stepped onto the stage of a National Women's Empowerment Summit, the spotlight soft but steady on her face, the murmurs of thousands settling into a reverent hush. She wore a bold red suit, her hair cascading in golden waves, her eyes no longer searching for permission, but commanding presence. As she began her speech, her voice didn't waver. It danced with truth. She spoke of being belittled, of losing faith in herself, of standing in front of mirrors and not recognizing the woman looking back. She told them of silence, of strength rediscovered, of love that doesn't fix you, but reminds you that you were never broken to begin with. And in the front row, Alex watched, his eyes soft with admiration, the proud curve of his smile betraying the storm of emotion beneath his calm. She paused mid-sentence, locking eyes with him, not to seek strength, but to share the moment with the one who had seen her when she had forgotten how. With a slow inhale, she turned back to the crowd and said, "I used to think my husband wore a suit because he was rich, but I've learned sometimes love wears a suit because it needs to walk into a boardroom and burn down a kingdom of cruelty." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was electric. Then, like a wave breaking open, the audience rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some wiping tears. But Rachel didn't cry, not out of pride or triumph, but because in that moment she had become the very thing she once searched for, a voice. A voice that didn't just speak for herself, but for every woman who had ever been dismissed, silenced, or diminished. And as she stepped down from the stage, the echoes of applause still roaring, she wasn't walking toward a man who had saved her. She was walking beside the one who had reminded her how to save herself. And together, they weren't just writing a love story anymore.